各位听众朋友们，大家好，我是海东，欢迎大家收听今天的爱家网教育讲座。今天的主题是我的医学院之路。本次讲座的主办方是爱家网。爱家网是一个位于纽约、服务华人家庭的新媒体。我们不定期的邀请各个领域的生活达人做讲座，分享他们的专业知识和生活经验，希望可以帮助华人家庭更好地融入美国社会。我们也十分欢迎在自己的领域中有所建树，而且愿意帮助他人的朋友们自荐，成为爱家网下一期的主题讲座嘉宾。欢迎大家关注爱家网的公众号北美爱家，获得下期讲座的信息。这里讲座的第2期，在第1期节目中，我们请来了原纽约布朗市区检察官办公室的 Richard 滕，介绍他是如何进入法学院成为一名律师的。而这次节目，我们请来了 Billy 杨来分享他进入医学院的经历。Billy 在进入医学院之前就读于史代文森高中，毕业后升入康奈尔大学，现在是 SUNY Downstate Medical Center 医学院2年级的学生。今天的讲座将通过爱家网官方网站、微信、喜马拉雅、YouTube 和 Facebook 这5个平台进行同步播放，欢迎大家通过方便自己的平台收听。下面就请大家收听今天的主题讲座《我的医学院之路》，讲座为英文，欢迎各位家长邀请自己的孩子一同收听。Billy 你好，欢迎你做客爱家网，能否请你和听众朋友们打个招呼，并用中文介绍一下你的个人背景？
好的，大家好，我名字叫 Billy Yang，我现在是在 SUNY Downstate 医学院的一个医学生。我是美国出生的 ABC， 我从小长大，从小到大是在 New York City 长大的。我参加了史代文森高中，然后是从康奈尔大学毕业的。我今天很高兴有这个机会跟你们聊天。
好 ，Welcome to the show. You're currently a medical school student at SUNY Downstate Medical Center, so you're on your way to become a doctor. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right.
All right. Which year is it?
Second year.
Cool. So doctor is one of the most ideal professions or career path a lot of Chinese parents hope their children to become. So congratulations. And thank you for coming onto the show to share your experience, how you walk down this path. So let's get started.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So first of all, let's take a look at how to become a doctor. So can you break it down for us, the steps it takes to become a doctor? For example, the college, the Mcat, the medical school, the residency, fellowship. How many years each step going to take?
Sure.
So take it away.
Sure, absolutely. So for most people, they have to go through 4 years of college, and then 4 years of medical school, and then residency. Now, in college, that's when you take the MCAT. And for many people, that's usually at towards the end of the 3rd year, oftentimes during the summer. And then they can apply for medical school in the 4th year of college. Some people decide to take a few years off in between college and medical school. This has become very, very common. In fact, I think the average age for matriculated students is now 24 years old. So on average, people take 2 years off in between college and medical school. So that might be a little bit untraditional. But if we follow the traditional path, then after college, there's 4 years of medical school. Now, during medical school, you start to figure out what sort of specialty you want to pursue. So during your 3rd year of medical school, you go through your clinical rotations, and that's when you get a real exposure towards actual medicine. And then once you think you know what you want to apply for, during your 4th year of medical school, you apply for a residency, which can go anywhere from 3 to 7 years, depending on what you pursue. And then after that, you're a full-fledged attending physician. You're, I guess, what we can say is a real doctor. And you can continue your education by pursuing a fellowship, but that's not really necessary. There are certain things like, for example, cardiology or gastroenterology. Those things are fellowships that some people choose to pursue after their internal medicine residency, for example. So those are options. I mean, as you can tell, it's a really long path, but at the end, I'm sure that it's going to be very rewarding.
Cool. I'm just doing a quick math. So so you mentioned that most people are going to take 2 years gap before they go to medical school, and the average age was 24, and plus 4 years at medical school. When they get out of medical school, they'll be 28. Then following that will be 3 to 7 years of residency. So if we take the average, like 5 years, so when they get out of the residency, that's 32 years old. And how long the fellowship normally take?
That would depend on the exact fellowship that you're pursuing. There are some that are only 1 year long, and there are some that are, I think, up to 3 years long.
Got it. Cool. So the total time when they finish all their study, got out of the fellowship, the optional fellowship, I understand is optional, they'll be about 35 years old.
That can be the case, yeah, for many people.
Got it. You just described the whole path you're currently in the medical school phase.
Yes.
It's still some way to go.
Yes, you could say that.
All right, so now that we are clear about the path to become a doctor, let's take a look at what it takes to walk down this path successfully. So first thing that really comes to my mind, I have no knowledge about how to become a doctor now and what it takes. So first thing that comes to my mind is the academic achievements. They probably got to be a very good student. So you mentioned earlier that you went to Stuyvesant for high school, then you went to Cornell for college. That's like the top notch of the schools that people can go to. And in Chinese, there's a specific term called 学霸. Have you heard about that term?
No, I don't think so.
All right, so basically it's a compliment. It's used to describe the highest achieving students, normally who are at the top 1% or 5% among all students. Would you consider yourself one of those students?
Do I consider myself that? No, not really. No, I consider myself just pretty regular person, I guess. I just tried to become a doctor, and I guess it's worked out so far. Cool. But I would not consider myself the very best at all. Not even close.
Okay. All right. I'm actually a little surprised. So do you mind sharing with us how much you score for SAT? Is that something you want to share?
I scored in the 99th percentile.
Cool. That's really good. Cool. In terms of the good students, they're the smart kind of students or the hardworking kind of students. So which side are you? Are you the smart one or the hardworking one?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I think when I was younger, when I was in high school, elementary school, middle school, when I was a child, I thought that I was considered, a smarter kid because I didn't have to study as much to do well in school. Even for something like the SAT, I barely prepared for it. Everything just seemed to work out. But as I got further along in my education, towards college, and then even more so in medical school, I've come to realize that just relying on that is not enough, and that you actually need to work very, very hard. Otherwise, the other hardworking people are just going to outcompete you. They're just going to do better. So at this point, right now, I think that I would definitely consider myself more hardworking than naturally smart. Just being around all these intelligent, successful, like-minded peers, it's a very humbling experience. I think that's where I stand. More on the hardworking side than naturally intelligent. Cool.
I really like this answer. I think this is also a very good takeaway for some of the audience. Obviously, you are a smart kid. You barely prepared for SAT, but you got 99th percentile, and you went to Cornell, and you didn't have to study much to score high before your college. As you progress with your education, you have to study hard. So I think that really tells people a lot that even though you can be smart, but you still have to be hardworking to achieve. Do you have any secrets that you can offer to our audience that how you can do so well academically in high school?
In high school, in retrospect, looking back, I think it's one of my biggest regrets that I didn't work harder because I feel like I could have done better. I think that, and this is something that I'm sure that any high school listeners would already have heard, but it's totally true to not leave things for the last minute. The most important thing that you can do is plan your time, okay? When you learn how to manage your time, that's when you become so much more efficient and so much more effective and you'll just feel like there's more time to study and learn things. And then as a result of that, there's going to be more time to enjoy yourself. You won't feel like you're under pressure all the time. So I think that's really it, you know. And when you're using your time to study, you're really focused. You're not distracted, because when people say, "Oh, I studied for 5 hours, but I feel like I didn't learn anything," you have to think to yourself, "Well, how did you spend those 5 hours? Were you really focusing, or were you, on Facebook half the time?" So that's another thing. So I think that's what it really boils down to. There's nothing that I truly believe that there's nothing that hard work can't really accomplish. So if you just keep to it, then good things will come.
Great. I think that's another very good golden nuggets right here. So, yeah, so how to manage your time, be more efficient. It reminds me a saying that it's not really how busy you are, it's how productive you are. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So great. So at this point, I like to ask one of my favorite questions. Were your
Okay.
parents tiger parents?
I think my mom's going to listen to this later on, so I have to be careful about what I say. When I was younger, I would say so. My parents sent me to Chinese school. We took piano lessons, art lessons, and they definitely pushed upon us the importance of education. And when I was a very young child, I remember getting so angry with them. I asked them, "Why do I have to go to summer school when my friends are outside playing? It's not like I'm doing poorly in school. I'm doing well. Why do I still need to go to school in the summer?" And they just said that, it's for the future. It's going to pay off. You don't like it now, but you'll appreciate it later on. So that turned out to be true. All of those things were very, very helpful. And I'm very thankful for those experiences growing up. And actually, as I got a little bit older towards high school, and then even more so during college, my parents became much more relaxed, much more understanding that this was a very high pressure situation. And even if you try your best to become a doctor, to get into medical school, sometimes your best isn't necessarily enough. That's the truth. So they never really pushed too much pressure on me. They just told me, try your best, and if it works out, it works out. And if it doesn't, we know that you're going to find success some other way. So I always thought to myself that this was something that I was very thankful for, that they took this load off of my chest. And in some way, it made it even easier for me to succeed, I think.
Cool. Great answers. We're talking about what it takes to become doctors. Besides good score, what else does it take to become a doctor?
To get into medical school, the two most important things, and I definitely want to emphasize this, the most important things are the GPA and the Mcat scores. That I just want to emphasize. You already mentioned it, but I need to say that again. GPA and Mcat are the most important. Without that, there's not much else that you can do. I mean, it doesn't matter how well-rounded you are. Without good scores, most medical schools will pass over you. That's just a fact. Now, with that said, good scores are not enough. If you have these numbers, some of the most important things for you to do are to volunteer. Volunteering in a community is really good. Doing things like, clothing drives or volunteering at soup kitchens, things like that, volunteering activities are really great. And they're also fun. I think that it's really nice to be involved in the community. I did that a lot in college. Other than that, you also want to have exposure to a healthcare setting, and this can also take the form of volunteering. So, for example, volunteering in a hospital, in any capacity, if that's just escorting patients to and from their rooms, or helping to feed patients, or helping to educate patients, anything that the hospital might task you with. These are very important things to do. As a college student, you're going to want to have some shadowing hours. So you're going to want to have, I would say at least probably 50 hours, probably around 50 hours of shadowing where you get to actually see doctors work. This is both one for you, the student, to figure out if being a doctor is what you actually want to do. And two, it's for the medical school to look at your application and be like, okay, this kid has some exposure to medicine. He's not just coming in blind. He knows what to expect, because that's very important. It's a really long road, so you definitely want to know what you're getting yourself into. And another thing that I think is very important is research opportunities in undergrad. Now, I think that this is more important if you're the type of student that is trying to go for the best of the best medical schools. Schools like Harvard, Stanford, these type of schools, they have a strong research focus, and they want to see students come in with a strong research background most of the time. I think if you look at the statistics that are published, I think something like 97% of all incoming Harvard Medical School students have some research background. So that's something that's very important to do, especially if you're going for the top medical schools.
So what do you mean by the research? Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, yeah, sure. By research, I mean doing novel scientific research. So you're working with often a PhD, with a professor on a project that they're working on. They're trying to find some new information about some topic, and they're running experiments. And you, as an undergrad, as a college student, you can help them do these tasks. Usually, as a college student, you're tasked with doing things that are pretty simple, things that they will train you to do, and then you can just do them and spend the time to do it. But these are things that will teach you lab techniques. These are things that will teach you how to even write manuscripts, or how to draft abstract for publication even. So that's what I mean by research. Typically, it's basic science research. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for explaining that. So you mentioned that the shadowing happened in college years or during high school?
That can happen at any point, but I think that it's more likely to happen in college, because I think unless you have a family friend who happens to be a doctor, I think doctors are more likely to take a college student more seriously than a high school student. So as a student, it's going to be your job to find a doctor who you think would be willing to let you shadow, and then you need to reach out to them, send them an email, or call their office, whatever it takes, to get in touch with them, and then ask them if it's okay to watch them work for a morning or for an afternoon or something like that. But typically, this is done as a college student.
Got it. Thanks for explaining that. So anything else you want to add about what it takes to become a doctor?
I just want to say this one more time. I think that it's actually not so much about being smart. It's much more about hard work, because being in medical school right now, I can definitely see that being smart, obviously it's helpful, and obviously it's very, very good. But, you spend so much time memorizing all these facts, all of these small, tiny minutiae, there's so much information that hard work definitely trumps all. So I would say that that's definitely the big takeaway.
Got it. That's really great. So just in summary, you mentioned you got to have good score. I got to have good Mcat and GPA. That's a must, but that's not enough. Yeah, you need to do some volunteering work, like serving the community, have some exposure in the hospital, the medical field, and help well with the research that those are the top medical schools will look at. You mentioned a few top medical schools like Harvard and Stanford. Any other medical schools you want to mention?
Oh, I mean, there are so many. There's so many great schools. Off the top of my head, I can think of Johns Hopkins. I can think of Weill Cornell in New York City, Columbia, NYU. These are all great schools. There's so many great schools. And now that we're talking about this, I should also say that there really isn't a bad medical school, at least when it comes to medical schools in the United States. they're all very difficult to get into. That's something that I didn't know as a college student. I thought that if I wanted to go to medical school, I would just go. I would just apply like I applied for college, and then I would just go.
Yeah.
But it's not quite that simple. So just to give some rough estimates, rough numbers out there, of all of the people who apply for medical school in any 1 year, 60% of them do not get in anywhere. So they just get flat out rejected by every school that they apply to. And so of those 40% who get in, most of them, I think more than half of them, only get into one school. So they don't even have a choice of where they go. They just go to one school. So I think that you'll find that that's very different from a high school student applying for college. Most of those people have numerous options to choose from, but that's definitely not the case for medical school. And when it comes to acceptance rates, I think the average medical school has an acceptance rate somewhere between 3 and 5%. Even state schools are very competitive. It's low single-digit acceptance rates. And just to provide you with some perspective, Harvard undergrad, Harvard College, right? I think they have an acceptance rate of 8%. So it just gives some perspective of how difficult it might be to get into medical school. So don't take that for granted.
Got it. We're definitely gonna dig a little bit further on that later in the show.
Okay, sure.
Right now, so we just reviewed how to become a doctor and what it takes to become one. And next, I'd like to take us back to your high school years and dig a bit further on your high school experiences. So was it in high school when you kind of made up your mind or got interested in becoming a doctor, or has that happened at all?
I actually had wanted to become a doctor since I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. It's something that I just thought that I would enjoy doing because I have always enjoyed science ever since I was a little kid. But then actually in high school, that was when I started to learn more about different things. And I started taking economics classes and business class, government classes. And then I thought to myself, maybe I don't want to be a doctor. Maybe there's more to life that I could explore. Maybe I want to become a scientist or a mathematician or work in finance. I don't know. So I actually decided that I should keep my options open in high school. And so when I went to college, I continued to take pre-med classes just so that I would keep the medical school door open, so to speak, so that if I decided that I wanted to go to medical school, I still could. But I also explored some other options. But ultimately, I did some thinking, and it was in college that I really decided, I think I want to be a doctor. Final answer.
Final answer. I like that. So which year in college when you kind of get that final answer?
I would say it was actually sophomore year. And I think that that was because it was during sophomore year that I started to do some shadowing, and I started to really explore the field seriously. And so I actually shadowed an orthopedic surgeon who happened to be a Cornell graduate. And I saw what he did in the operating room, and I thought to myself, wow, I could really see myself doing something like this one day. And that's when I started taking everything much more seriously.
Wow, I see. So you see how people perform in the job, and you kind of like it. That's when you make up your mind. I'm actually surprised you didn't faint.
Not at all. Yeah, but that's funny because the surgeon said to me, it's okay if you need to sit down. It's okay if you need to take a breather. It happens all the time. But I was just fascinated. I couldn't get enough of it.
Cool. Awesome. So what exactly really interests you to become a doctor? Why did you want to be a doctor?
I think there's a lot of reasons. First of all, like I said, I grew up really liking science, and of course you have to have a strong science background to go into medicine. But also I think that it's a noble profession. It's you're spending your life helping people, taking care of people, and I think that that's a good way to contribute to society, of course. Of course, it's also financially stable at some point. When you're done with all your training, reimbursement is great. Doctors get paid fairly well. So I thought, these were all a combination of factors that seemed to work out. So why not go for it?
Awesome. So you mentioned about shadowing when you're in college, but before that, when you were in high school, did you have any extracurricular activities related to the medical industry?
In high school?
Yeah.
Not at all. Not at all. I just took AP biology, but that was essentially the extent of it. I mean, there were many opportunities, especially at Stuyvesant. There were many opportunities to pursue extracurriculars that could have been geared towards medicine, but I didn't really think about that too much back then.
Got it. Now you walked that path, and is that something you would recommend high school students do when they're in high school and volunteer in some medical industry?
Not necessarily. I mean, I don't think so. I think the vast majority of high school students won't really be able to capitalize on a lot of those sort of opportunities. I mean, if you happen to know a professor at a medical university who's doing research and they're willing to take on a high school student and let them work with them, then fine. That seems like a really great opportunity. But for most extracurricular activities, like if you're in a club, and if you're just doing like a medicine club or something in high school, it doesn't really help out too much. I think that level of exposure is quite small. But with that said, I think that if that's what that student really wants to do, then go for it. I think high school is a good time to figure out what it is that you want to do, and if you want to spend your after-school activities pursuing other extracurriculars, then go for it. I wholeheartedly support spending a lot of time in sports. If you're an athlete, that's something that's really great. It's not only is it going to keep you in shape, but it looks great for college. It looks great for medical school when you apply. I don't think there's, especially at the high school level, there's not any one particular extracurricular activity that I would recommend. And I don't personally regret doing what I did in high school at all.
So on that, what did you do?
Back in high school, I had some involvement in student government, relatively small involvement, I would say, but I think I spent most of my time actually in choir. I sang a lot in high school, which is funny because I don't consider myself a very good singer. But I spent a lot of time after school singing in an a cappella group and with the high school choir. I was also involved in math team for a while, for 2 years. But that's when I figured out that the people who were really, really good at math were much better than I was. So I decided not to do that after the first 2 years. I feel like I did some more things, but those are the things that come up off the top of my head.
Got it. That's interesting. You went to Stuyvesant. Stuyvesant has lots of Asian students. Were there a lot of competitions?
I would say so. I would say that there is a lot of competition at Stuyvesant. It's not so much that students will go out of their way to harm each other. Most people are very nice, very friendly. It's just that everybody is trying to do the best that they can. Yeah. And when you get some of the best and brightest young students from New York City and put them into one school, and everyone is trying to go to the best schools, the best colleges, it's going to be competitive just because of the nature of what it is. So I never really felt that it was competitive, but I understood that it was, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Stuyvesant, was it most of the time you just study after study, or did you have fun at all?
I had a lot of fun. I actually really liked my time in high school. Like I said, I didn't spend a lot of time studying in high school. I spent a lot of time just hanging out with my friends, and then when I had to do my homework, I would do it, and when I had to study, I would study a little bit, usually the day or two before the exam. I don't recommend any high school students to do that. It's not a good idea. But I love Stuyvesant, and I only have fond memories, really.
Awesome. I guess you would do it again, right? If you had to go again.
Well, I don't know about that.
Awesome. All right, moving on from the high school, let's talk a little bit about college.
Okay.
Do you need to go to certain college in order to help you to get into medical school?
Absolutely not. You do not. And you know, in fact, I think that in some ways it could hurt you if you go to a different school. So, like I said before, one of the most important things for getting to medical school is having a good GPA. And if you go to a school that is much harder, you might have a lower GPA than if you went to a school that was not as competitive. So that's something for you to consider. And I think for most med schools, getting a 4.0 from a state school is probably much more impressive than getting a 3.5 from a very, very difficult school. So that's something to consider. Now, if you have a 4.0 from an Ivy League versus from a state school, you know, that might be a tiebreaker. You know, going to an Ivy League school might just, you know, edge you out against the competition. But I would say that it's definitely not necessary. With that said, school reputation is something that many medical schools do take into consideration. How much of a difference it makes is unknown to me. It's up in the air, but I would say that it's probably a relatively small portion.
Got it. So that's a great takeaway from some of the students, I think.
Right.
You want to make sure your GPA is high in college.
Yeah.
So
regardless of where you go.
Got it. So in college, are there certain type of majors or courses that the medical school admission officer would like to see?
No, I don't think so. To my knowledge, your undergraduate major makes almost no difference upon your chances of admission. And, you know, I know that a lot of pre-meds go into college as a biology major or something like that. And I would say that, you know, that's totally unnecessary. Of course, if you really do want to be a biology major, then go for it. But if you want to take your pre-med classes, you know, your intro biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, etc., if you want to take those and then have a different major, like a business major or a math major, I think that that's even better, because, you know, you're learning something else entirely. It'll provide you with an extra skill set. And, you know, I think something else to consider is that oftentimes pre-med classes, you know, they're pretty difficult. And people at my college, they always just joked about how business majors had it so much easier. You know, everyone just got A's. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what people said. So I don't know. It might even be very helpful to, you know, do a business major and just get straight A's in those classes and then take your pre-med classes on the side. I didn't do that. I was a biology major, so I can't speak to that from personal experience. But going back, I would strongly consider doing something else.
Interesting. So you were in biology major, right?
Yeah, specifically it was human biology, health, and society. I don't think it necessarily helped or hurt me at all. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot of really cool things in my major, but part of me regrets not trying something else, because everything I did in college was, you know, after a certain point, during my third and fourth year, everything was pretty much in preparation for medical school. And in retrospect, I think that if I could have pursued, you know, a greater variety of classes, I think that would have made me a more well-rounded person, because I'm already doing medicine now. So maybe I should have done something different earlier.
That's a very good point. So have you thought about getting a job after the college instead of going for the medical school at all?
You mean just not doing medical school at all?
Right. Because you graduated from college, you can get a job.
Well, as a biology major graduate, you don't really have a lot of good job prospects outside, you know, fresh out of college. That's the truth. Most people who graduate with a biology major need to pursue some sort of graduate degree, or they're going to work as a laboratory research assistant and get promoted very, very slowly. That's my understanding. So, and another thing that you could do is to become a high school or middle school teacher, something like that. So, with those options ahead of me, I didn't really consider those very strongly. I think that if I had wanted to leave the idea of medical school, I would have definitely changed my major at some point to better prepare myself for the workforce. But at some point, by my third or fourth year, I already felt like it was too late. I already had made preparations to go to medical school, so I was ready to do so. No regrets at all.
Cool. Awesome. So anything I missed to cover the college part that you think I should probably have asked?
I think insofar as, going to medical school is concerned, there are just some things that make a particular candidate very, very attractive. So I mentioned a lot of the other things, GPA, Mcat, volunteering, shadowing, research, all of that stuff. But as a college student, there are other things that you could do that could really make you stand out. For example, if you are a star athlete, that's something that medical schools will take into account and will find very attractive. If you started a company, if you worked in a startup, in other words, anything that makes you really unique is something that medical schools will find would contribute to their overall student body, and they would be more likely to take you. And I think that this is especially true for certain schools, for certain top schools especially. They love having, or at least it seems to me that they love having this diverse student body, this very interesting student body, where not everybody is a biology major who, took all the same classes and everything. You know what I mean? So they want to have a varied student body. So by making yourself interesting, by finding the time to make yourself interesting, that could pay off in the end.
Yeah, that's a great point. I wouldn't expect that medical school would do that. I would think that maybe undergraduate would try to pick up some interesting or unique personalities, but medical school, yeah, that's great. That's a great point.
Yeah, it's definitely true for medical school, but as long as it does not impact your grades still come first.
Yep, absolutely. So now moving on from college, let's take a look at the Mcat. You mentioned earlier that most people are going to take it towards the end of the college years. Can you explain to somebody who have no idea about this what Mcat is?
Sure. So the Mcat is the exam that students take to get into medical school. It's pretty much like the SAT, but the medical school version. So it's roughly 7 hours long, and it covers a number of subjects. So it covers biochemistry, biology, general chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, psychology and sociology, and also there is a English verbal reasoning portion. And I think they also expect you to know some basic calculus for the purposes of the physics portion. I'm not entirely certain about that. I can't remember. It feels like it's been so long since I took it. But that's the Mcat. Now, it's scored on a scale from 472 to 528. Those numbers seem a little bit arbitrary. I don't know why that is what it is, but it is what it is. And so 528 is the top score. It's very, very, very hard to get a 528. I don't know anyone who did. I only know a small handful of people who even scored above a 520. And I can already feel like the next question might be, what sort of score might you need to get into medical school? And to that, I would say that the average for admission to medical school, to United States MD school, is, I believe, around a 508 to a 509, something in that neighborhood. All of these statistics are also available online. The AAMC publishes all of these things. They publish average statistics, acceptance rate, by state residency, by gender, by race. So they publish a lot of information. They're very transparent. And I encourage any college student to just take a quick look at that, just to maybe see what they're up against and see how they stack up.
Got it. Great tip. What is AAMC stand for? Can you explain that?
The AAMC, I think that's the American Association of Medical Colleges. I'm not 100% certain. I would have to look that up, but I think that's what that stands for.
Cool, no worries. So, is there a writing test for Mcat?
No, there's no longer a written portion. There used to be a few years ago, but they got rid of that, and now the entire test is multiple choice.
Awesome. So, in general, do you think Mcat is a very hard exam comparing to some other standard tests?
I would say that it is much more difficult than most other standardized exams. It's definitely much harder than the SAT, and I never took the GRE, but I looked at some review books for the GRE, and I can tell you for sure that given by what I've seen in the GRE review books, I would say the MCAT is much, much harder. I think that has a lot to do with the fact that it has so many different subjects to cover, and then it's also 7 hours long, so it's also a test of endurance and stamina. And then, just the questions, they require you to really think about things sometimes, they require a certain level of critical thinking to really understand. So, I would definitely say that the MCAT is quite difficult, and it takes a lot of preparation to do well for most people.
Got it. So how long did you have to prepare for MCAT?
I studied for 6 weeks, and during those 6 weeks, the MCAT was all I did. I must have studied maybe 50 or 60 hours a week, I think, for the MCAT, and I felt fairly well prepared.
Did you study on your own, or did you have to get help from test prep?
I think for the MCAT, studying on your own is probably the best thing to do. There are a lot of test prep services out there, which I think are very expensive and probably not very necessary. I think that if you're able to teach yourself, or not teach yourself, but review the material by yourself and come up with a study plan, that should be sufficient. With that said, there are a lot of good resources out there to help you plan. Some of your listeners might be familiar with the online forum Reddit. Reddit has a lot of great resources for MCAT planning. They have a subreddit. So a subreddit is a smaller part of the larger forum, r/MCAT. Now, this resource was very useful to me because it helped me plan out how to study. It helped me decide what resources were good and what weren't, because I would pretty much ask other people on the forum what their recommendations were, and they were just very, very helpful. So I think that that's something that college students should be made aware of.
Got it. Thank you for that. So after MCAT, what do somebody do to apply for medical school? Do they have to send in some application?
Mm-hmm. So there is a application. It's very similar to the common app that one might use to apply for college, where you list out your experiences, like extracurricular activities, research activities, anything like that. You draft a personal statement. You attach your college transcript, all of your grades, that sort of thing. And then you apply to any number of medical schools in the country that you would like to apply to. The average student applies for roughly 15 schools. And so usually for each of those 15 schools, for each of those schools that you apply to, there is a secondary application. And that's sort of like the supplement for college. So it's an extra essay or an extra questionnaire or whatever those schools might want you to fill out for them. That you would have, so it's something extra that you would have to do for that one particular school. And oftentimes they ask questions like, how would you contribute in a unique way to our student body? Or, if I remember there was a school that asked something like, if you're not from an urban environment, how do you think you would adapt to being in one? And this was a school that was in an urban environment. So it could be any number of questions, any type of thing. It's completely up in the air. So that's something that people should be aware of. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks. So it's pretty much like the college application process.
Yes, that's pretty much right.
Cool.
The way that it works out is that you usually apply over the summer. So something to keep in mind when you do apply is that the early bird gets the worm. You definitely want to apply early rather than later because interviews go out on a rolling basis for most schools. So earlier on in the cycle, there are going to be more interviews for people to give out. And if you submit your application in late, at that point, they may have already run out of interviews. So it's going to be much harder for you to get a spot. I think just to attest to that, I don't even know what the deadline was for submitting applications. I only know when the applications opened up because I knew I was submitting on the first day. And I think that's actually probably pretty true for most students. Many of the people that I know, they submitted within the first week that the application opened up online. So I think that's definitely crucial.
Got it. So you mentioned interviews. So after submit the application, everybody has to get an interview if they're eligible for the college, for that medical school?
Actually, no. Getting interviews is actually very competitive. It's difficult. Most people only get 3 interviews. So every single interview that you get is very, very helpful. It's consider yourself lucky to have gotten one. And I think that statistically speaking anyway, getting the interview is the hardest part because if you remember from earlier on when I said most medical schools have acceptance rates like 3%, 5%, something like that. After the interview, depending on the school, you can have like a 50% chance of getting in. Some schools might accept 50% of the people who they interview, or even 70%, depending on the school. It's totally up in the air. But the odds are much, much better after you've gotten an interview.
Got it. So what do they ask during the interview? How long does it take?
That, again, it depends on the school. Some schools will ask very standard questions, very standard interview questions. They'll ask you to talk about yourself and why you want to be a doctor, things like that. There are other schools who follow a very different type of format, something called the multiple mini interview, the MMI. I think that this is a trend that's been picking up across the country, and a lot of schools are adopting this now. So the MMI is it's different from the traditional interview where instead of having one person talk to you for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, this one you go to different stations, and at each different station, it's a different interviewer who might talk to you for 5 or 10 minutes. They might only ask you one question, and then that's the station. So oftentimes in these sort of situations, they might ask you ethical questions, or they might probe you a little bit deeper and ask you more thought-provoking questions. So that's something that is generally pretty common knowledge. Most people, after they've gotten the interview, they will know whether or not it's an MMI or if it's a traditional interview. So it's something that students should definitely prepare for.
Got it. After the interview, you get an offer.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. So you are currently at medical school, the second year. How's your experiences like so far?
It's tiring. I like it a lot. I still have no regrets whatsoever. I like it a lot. It's great. It's really, really great. And I'm learning a lot of really cool things. But it's a lot of work. Yeah, I guess that's really all I have to say. It's a lot of work. It's more studying than I thought I would ever have to do.
What's the most challenging part in medical school comparing to college?
I think that the most challenging part would be getting used to the volume of information that you have to know. So people compare medical school to drinking down a fire hose. So, it's just this constant stream of this constant stream of information that you cannot stop. And if you do stop, you'll just drown on it. And it's kind of true. You just constantly have to keep up with the information. You can take a day or two off, but that's stuff that you're going to have to be responsible for. And every day it's just more and more stuff that's just gets tacked on. And then at the end of your first 2 years, you need to take this big licensing exam, the step 1 of the US MLE. And that's something that's a very high stakes exam that covers everything that you learned in the first 2 years of medical school. So, it's not just that you need to learn this stuff, you definitely do need to retain it, both for the exam and for your future patients. So there can be a lot of pressure, and, if that's not something that you're used to, I think it's something that medical students learn to get used to very quickly.
It's busier than college.
Yeah, it's much busier, much busier.
Yeah. So do people drop out from medical school?
They do, but it's relatively uncommon. I think more than 95% of people who start medical school finish in the United States. Oh. So I think most of the time, if you're good enough to get in, if you really want to, you're good enough to finish.
Got it. So let's talk a little bit about the blood phobia. You mentioned you shadowed the physician and you were okay with it. And have you heard stories that some of the medical school students couldn't handle it?
Mm-hmm. People who are afraid of blood or afraid of seeing, the insides of a human body, I don't necessarily think that they can't be doctors. I guess it depends on how bad this phobia is. If they faint on the sight of a drop of blood, then, if it's really that bad, then maybe they should consider a different career. But if they're just uncomfortable around blood and uncomfortable around seeing, internal organs, then maybe they should just stay away from a career in surgery. There are many types of doctors who won't see much blood, psychiatry, for example, or radiology. Even pediatricians and family medicine doctors, a lot of the times they don't necessarily see large quantities of blood. Of course, there are always going to be circumstances when they do. But I wouldn't rule it out. And unless it's truly a pathological fear, I think that it's something that, students may even learn to get over.
Cool. That's a great takeaway, because there are common myth about you're afraid of blood, you should not be a doctor. But as you explained, there are many different kind of doctor you can be, and you don't necessarily have to deal with a lot of blood.
Right.
Cool. Do medical students have to do internship in hospitals each summer?
Actually, we don't really get summers off. So
it's not bad.
Yeah. So I guess that answers that question. We get the first summer off when we get I think most schools give around 8 weeks, but it's not really a summer off. Most medical students choose to use this 8 weeks to pursue research with the faculty. So they work on a project and they try to get some sort of publication out of it. They try to get some sort of authorship to show residency programs later on, that they're productive people, that they can make progress on research projects. So, really there's not really summers to speak of after the first year. After the second year, you take step 1 of the USMLE licensing, the USMLE exam. And after that, you just pretty much dive straight into your third year. There's not really a break.
Wow, non-stop.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the cost. How much does it cost now?
Well, NYU is free. I can talk about that. But I think for most medical schools, it can, at least in New York State, SUNYs are costing a little bit over $40,000 a year just for tuition. I know that there are other states that have state schools that are a little bit cheaper, like $20,000, $30,000. Texas has a lot of really cheap state schools. I think many of their schools have tuitions for under $20,000. But as a general rule, I would say that if you're if you're looking to go to school in the United States at a medical school, you're on average going to graduate with over $200,000 worth of debt.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
Yes, yes, it is.
So actually, you mentioned NYU, the free tuition. What was your reaction when you first heard about it?
I thought to myself, no way. And I thought to myself, I really wish I worked harder in undergrad to get into NYU. That's what I really thought. But, you know, honestly, good for them. I think that it's a step in the right direction because having medical school be this expensive, I think is pushing away a lot of smart people from the field of medicine. You know, a lot of people are deciding that they want to do computer science instead, that they want to do finance because they figure, you know, it's so expensive, why bother? You know, so I think that NYU is setting a great example and that other schools, if they have the resources to do so, they should definitely follow suit.
Awesome. How do most regular medical school students pay for their tuition currently?
They take out loans from the U.S. government. So the U.S. government pretty much lets you borrow as much money as you need to pay for medical school. And the interest rate is roughly 7%. And that starts the moment you take the loan out. So you can imagine that it builds up very, very quickly. But exactly. That's probably how most people pay for it.
I see. When you were in medical school, I probably know the answer to this question now, but can you work to make money to pay for the tuition?
I don't see how that would be possible.
Yeah, because you have no time, right?
Yeah, there's not much time to do anything. And I think whatever job that you could take on, it wouldn't really, you know, pay that much to make a dent in the debt that you're about to incur. So it's not something that I would recommend to anybody.
Got it. So any suggestion for students who looking for options to pay for their medical school expense?
Yeah, there are quite a few options, I think. Something that comes to mind is one of my roommates, actually. He is on a military scholarship. So he has essentially a deal with the United States military where he has his 4 years of medical school paid for. And he also receives a living stipend every month to cover basic expenses. So he goes through medical school under the sponsorship of the military. And then when he's done, he works for the military for a set number of years. And then after that, his obligation is over and he can choose to continue working as a military physician or become a civilian physician. So that's one way to get pretty much free medical school. But something that I should mention, though, is that most people say that it's not really worth it. Because, because if you think about, because as a military physician, it's a little bit of a different process. When you apply for residency programs, you don't go through the same match process. So I should probably explain the match and what that means. So the match is pretty much how, it's what decides what residency program you end up going to. So when you apply for residency, it's not so simply that, you know, you apply for a bunch of programs and then you would get an offer and then you choose. It doesn't work like that. You apply for a bunch of programs and then some of them will offer you an interview and then you interview at those programs and then they will rank you. They will rank you compared to all the other students that they interviewed. Likewise, you as the student will rank all the residency programs that you interviewed at. So everyone is ranking each other, and then this information gets put into a computer, which then spits out one program for each student to go to. Take it or leave it. You don't really have a choice. So that's why it's called the match. You literally get matched with a residency program. So that's how it works for most medical students. It doesn't work like that exactly for military students. So people who have the military scholarship, it's a much smaller pool of students competing for a smaller pot of residency programs. And these residency programs are based off of what the military needs. So this will change from year to year. There are always going to be a lot of people who need, family medicine doctors in the military. But if you're interested in a small specialty like dermatology or ear, nose, and throat, for example, there might only be one spot in that entire year for all of the military sponsored students. So that's something for people to consider. And then also, as an attending physician, after you finish residency, you have your commitment to the United States military. And most of the time, your reimbursement as a military doctor is less than that of a civilian doctor. You'll just be making less money. So in the end, how does the math work out? I'm not entirely sure. I'm sure someone out there has crunched the numbers and has said, what is better. But I think that this is an option for many people, but it's something that they should not take very lightly. It's something that they should really, really think about and talk to the right advisors before making a decision.
Yeah, good advice. Make sure you do the math, right?
Yeah.
So can you tell me more about the residency? What is it about, and what do people do during the residency?
Well, it's difficult for me to really say since I am only a second-year medical student, but I'll try my best. My understanding of residency is that it's for the doctor. When you're a resident, you are a doctor. You have your MD or your DO, and it's for you to pretty much finalize your training. In medical school, you learn the very basics. You learn a little bit about everything, and then as a resident, you start to really specialize in one area of knowledge. For example, if you're a general surgery resident, for most people, this is 5 years. In your first year, you might be on the floors, you might be, consulting patients, that sort of thing. And then every single year, as you get more and more experience, you'll end up doing more and more surgery, and you'll start to carry a greater responsibility in the operating room until finally, when you're a fourth or fifth year resident, much of the operating is done by you, the resident, with the attending physician as supervision. And so that's essentially how it works. As you get more senior, as you get more older, you take on more responsibility, and then you also start to teach the younger residents and medical students what you've already learned.
Got it. So different specialties require different number of years of residency, right?
That's right.
Can you give us a bit more example? You mentioned that general surgery takes about 5 years.
Yeah, general surgery is 5 years. Pediatrics is usually 3 years. Internal medicine is 3 years. Something like neurosurgery is 7 years. And then ear, nose, and throat, that's 5 years. Urology is 5 years. Ophthalmology is usually 4 years. Radiology is 5 years. There's a ton of information out there on the internet for this sort of thing too. And I definitely encourage people to look into this sort of thing if they're interested, just to really understand how long training can take. That's something that definitely shouldn't be taken for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's your specialty?
Well, I'm still a medical student, so I definitely haven't picked one out yet, but I think that I would be very lucky to pursue a surgical subspecialty. I'm very interested in ear, nose, and throat. I'm interested in ophthalmology. I want to learn more about general surgery. But, I'm also interested in just learning more about what medicine has to offer. So I'm not closing any doors. Yesterday I actually talked to some psychiatry residents, and I met with them just to, ask them, what they do, just to learn more about the field. Last year I met with some anesthesiologists as well. I got to talk to the chair of the dermatology department here. So I've just been trying to talk to as many people as I could. And I'm definitely trying to keep my doors open. But if I had to say, ear, nose, and throat, I think it's the coolest.
Cool. Awesome. So let's move on to fellowship. Can you tell us what fellowship is about and how long that may take? You mentioned 1 to 3 years earlier.
Yeah.
You mentioned it's optional. So why do people go for a fellowship?
So fellowship is optional because you don't need it to become a licensed physician. Now, if, for example, I'll just talk about ear, nose, and throat as an example because that's the one I know the best because I worked with the ear, nose, and throat department here. So as a resident, you learn pretty much everything, the basics about ENT. You learn about the sinuses, laryngology, you do some plastic surgery, head and neck tumors, you treat all of that. But if you really want to specialize from being a general ENT into something much more specific, then you do need that extra training because most people, for example, who come out of a general ENT residency, they won't feel comfortable doing their own cochlear implants. So in order to really learn how to do that, if that's their area of interest clinically, they would want to pursue a neurootology fellowship, which could take 2 years. And in those 2 years, they will be spending dedicated time to really honing their skills on a lot of those procedures. If, for example, after your 5 years of ENT residency, you want to do, let's say, facial plastics, which is also an option, you could take the extra year to pursue a fellowship and really learn how to do reconstructive and cosmetic procedures on the face. So that's really the reason why. It's for the doctor to learn and master the techniques in order to become I guess, competent enough physician in that field that they want to be in.
Got it. So is a fellowship, in terms of the money, during this fellowship, do you get paid higher than residency doctor?
Yes, that's my understanding. I think it's on a scale for most things, but I've also heard, and I can't really confirm this, but I've also heard that there are some fellowship programs that aren't funded. So the pay scale is a little bit different. I'm not entirely sure because honestly, at this point in my career as a second-year medical student, I haven't looked or thought so far about fellowship yet, so I haven't really looked into it. But I think generally fellows get paid more, like in the vast majority of cases.
Great. So we reached the end of the interview, but there's just a couple more questions I have.
Yeah, sure.
Any questions that you can offer to parents if they're interested in encouraging their kids to become a doctor, how they can prepare themselves as well as prepare their kids ahead of time? I would tell the parents to encourage the kids to do well academically, and to stress the value of education, and to get them some exposure into maybe what a doctor does. But I would not recommend that a parent push their child in that direction. If the kid doesn't want to be a doctor, don't make them do it. I know that this is something that is true for a lot of, especially Chinese parents. They really want their kids to be a doctor. It's the one thing that I feel like all Chinese parents want their kids to be. Sometimes it seems that way, but if they don't want to be a doctor and you constantly try to pressure them and push them in that direction, two things are going to happen. Either they're gonna fail because their heart's not in it, and then that's terrible. Or they're gonna get into medical school and become a doctor and then hate it for the rest of their lives. So it's something that the child definitely needs to want for themselves. So I would say that it's not worth it to push your kid in that direction. There are so many other fields out there that if the kid wants to do it, if it's about money, honestly, medicine doesn't make as much as it used to. And we already talked about how expensive medical school is. If it's about money, don't go into medicine for the money. We already said you're going to be in your 30s before you're making real money, quote unquote doctor money. So if it's about money, medicine is not for you. If it's about prestige, there are so many other fields out there that are just as prestigious. So that's what I would say to the parents. Just let them do their thing, but always encourage them to do well. Awesome. I like that. So any words of wisdom you can offer those high school students if they are interested in becoming a doctor?
Yeah. I would tell them to keep their eyes on the prize and that it's a marathon, not a sprint. You know, I think that throughout the course of our conversation here, you may have gotten the idea that it's like after every step, there's a next thing. You know, after college, there's med school. After med school, there's residency. After residency, there's a fellowship. And then, you know, it just seems like it just goes on forever. And it's a test after a test after a test after a test. Yeah. Because that is what it is. So, you know, as a high school student, I would say that just have an idea of what the big picture is. And sometimes when it gets really tough, you know, if you get a bad test score, keep in mind that that's just one score, you know. Figure out why you got that score and then pick yourself up, and then, you know, don't get too worked up about it. There are other tests that you'll have to take and you can do better on the next one. So just keep on pressing forward. Don't forget why you're doing it. And then if you really work at it, I think more often than not, you'll be pleased with the outcome.
Cool. Is there a book that you would recommend you found very helpful to you personally, and why?
You know, now that you mention that, actually, there are a couple of books that I've read recently, medically related, that I thought were great. The first book that I can list, this one I read in college. It was The Emperor of All Maladies by Dr. Siddhartha Mukherjee. I think he is a oncologist, a cancer doctor, in Colombia, if I'm not mistaken. And this book that he wrote is just about the history of cancer, and the way that he wrote it is just so beautifully written. The language is fantastic. It's a pleasure to read that book, and it's one of my favorite books of all time. I think it also won a couple of awards, so I'm not the only person who feels that way. I definitely recommend that book. Another one is Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. He's also a physician. And Atul Gawande writes for several publications, and he's written several books, and I think any of his books are really great. But Being Mortal is the one that I read. And I think that, you know, it adds a really personal spin to medicine. And it really lets you take a step back and really think about, you know, if you're a medical student or if you're a pre-med, it really lets you see things from a different perspective. And a third one that I could recommend, and this is going to be the last one, is When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. So he was a neurosurgery resident. And what happened was, he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And so this book is essentially a memoir of his thoughts and his experiences going through this cancer that, you know, was really affecting his body while he was finishing his residency in neurosurgery, which is probably one of the most difficult residency programs that you could do. And it's a really touching book, and I have to say that when I read it, towards the end, I was moved to tears. You know, it's fantastic. It's also a very quick read. It's not too long. Yeah, I found all three of these books really enjoyable. They're all about medicine, so I think if you're really interested in medicine, I think you'll really like these two.
Thank you. The one last thing, can you share a personal mentor of yours, then say goodbye to our audience?
A personal mentor of mine?
Yeah.
So back in high school, my AP biology teacher, Dr. Udding, he was fantastic. I think it was through him that I really started to get a deeper appreciation for there's no other word to say it, the beautiful things that can happen in biology. You know, the cellular machinery that is inside all of us, and how complicated it is, and yet how seamlessly it seems to work and, you know, come together. The way that he taught biology was almost poetic and artistic, and I think that that's sort of what drew me even closer to medicine. You know, I didn't know that I wanted to be a doctor at that point, but you know, after he was a PhD. And after taking his AP biology class, I thought maybe I wanted to be a PhD too. It was something that I was considering. But I think he just taught me to appreciate the little things that make us what we are. And it was just a really cool experience to see things from his perspective. He was definitely one of my favorite teachers in high school, and I still am very thankful for all the lessons that I got from him.
Cool. That's a great experience. This has been very helpful. Thank you again for coming to the show and sharing your valuable experiences. And
no problem.
Yeah, have a good night and good luck on your marathon.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me.
今天的节目就结束了，再次感谢 Billy 抽出宝贵的私人时间为大家所做的分享，也特别感谢 Billy 的妈妈对本次节目的大力支持。我们祝 Billy 学业顺利，以后有合适的机会，我们再邀请他回来为大家分享。谢谢各位听众朋友们收听本次节目，祝大家晚安，我们下期节目再见。